Gormagad, Tommy agus Gormagad Galer, a cardja agus Fublatani Kunti and Clar. Tom, Trif Weektiv, as an Curra Kun Lartham Shaw, live in Inish, Equivalent, Tror, Ogla Kroga, a four boss or son of public Aaron Lawher Shaw, Kate Lean O'Hain. Peru, Patrick Mahoney, Christopher Quinn, agus William O'Shaughnessy, Kun Boss, Savarik, Savalia Shaw, Mara, Peru, Sidor in the public, the Brisun, or Foot Natira, August Kamala Shin, or the Bohra, August Nagurt, Gonfew Trio, now Rud, or Bit Moray. But a Realtus on Tearstar, the Takia, August the Spraga, Orikus Nabratana, a Rinna, Namara Hashin, August the Corduing, Darman, a Yena, Ershin, Rio. I commend the Republicans of Ennis and County Clare for remembering volunteers Patrick Mahoney, Christopher Quinn, and William O'Shaughnessy, who were executed 100 years ago this week on this site, and for restoring to its place the memorial plaque. And as I put these words together last evening, it just struck me that during the last 10 months I have been around the country from Dublin to Clare, from Sligo to Kerry, attending commemorations for fallen Republicans who were killed during the Civil War, executed in prisons and barracks or by the roadside by Free State forces during the counter-revolution which brought such disaster to this country. And it began for me in July last year, in July 2022, near to where I live in Kilbarrack. In the cemetery there is the grave of volunteer Thomas Wall. He was only 18 years old, and he was one of the first Republicans to be killed in the Civil War. He was shot dead during the Free State attack on the forecourts when the bombardment was over and when the Free State troops sacked the building. Tom Wall, a young volunteer, was killed. He is buried in Kilbarrack Cemetery. It reminds us also, that was July 1922, it reminds us also that that war did not begin when the treaty was signed. It didn't begin when the Dáil voted by a very slim majority, only 7 votes, in favour of the treaty. No, the war began 6 months later, because in the interim there were many efforts to maintain the unity of the IRA, to maintain political unity and to seek a way forward. The Dáil, at the time it voted for the treaty, was solemnly promised by Richard Mulcahy and others that the army would remain the army of the Republic, the army of the people. But that promise was broken, and it was very quickly broken. When the Irish Republican Army, which was a democratic organisation which elected its officers locally and nationally, when that organisation sought to hold a convention to decide its policy on the treaty, it was banned by the new Free State government. And the convention went ahead anyway. Now, some opponents of ours and opponents of Republicans of the time would have it that this was an attempt at an armed coup against the Free State by the IRA. But that was not the case. It was very far from the case. And in fact, the IRA in Dublin, the anti-treaty IRA, was so strong at that time, at the start of 1922, that had they wished to carry out an armed coup, they could have done so. But that was not what they wanted. They wanted to find a way forward to restore unity and to maintain the IRA as the army of the country. Instead, what happened was that the new Free State Army was set up. They occupied key positions in Dublin and around the country, and then the anti-treaty IRA did the same, and they occupied buildings, including the forecourts. And then, from April 1922, the unrelenting pressure from the British government started, and that pressure was on Michael Collins and the others in the provisional government of the Free State to go to war on the Republicans. And the Republicans had reason to believe that Michael Collins would not give in to that pressure. And why do I say that? because Michael Collins cooperated with the IRA in the Four Courts in assisting Republicans in the 6 counties to undermine the new British imposed unionist regime in Belfast. Collins supplied the IRA with weapons and transport and funds and men, and it's believed that he did so without the knowledge of his colleagues in the provisional government, including Cosgrave. But of course, Collins was playing a double game, and the trap he entered in Downing Street when he signed the treaty in December 1921, that trap was snapped shut on him in Dublin in July and June 1922, when the British government gave him an ultimatum. Bombard the Four Courts or we will. That was the ultimatum from the British government. And Collins duly bombarded the Four Courts, and so began the Civil War. So make no mistake, without British government pressure, without British government money, and without British government guns, there would have been no civil war in this country. The next month, Michael Collins met his tragic death. I was not at the Béal na Bláth commemoration centenary in Cork, but a few days later, I was in Whitehall in Dublin at the memorial to Sean Cole and Al Colley, 2 members of Fianna Éireann, young men in their teens. And while Collins' body lay in state in Dublin City Hall, these 2 young men were abducted by Free State forces. They were taken to the outskirts of the city and they were shot dead without charge or trial. A few days later, I was at the graveside of volunteer Bernard Daly in Drogheda. He was killed in the same manner as Cole and Colley on the same day, in the same part of Dublin and by the same forces. So began the so-called unofficial roadside executions by the Free State, around 100 of them from summer 1922 to summer 1923. In September last, I was here in County Clare at Kilmoon Cemetery outside Liston, Varna, speaking at the grave of volunteer Michael Neville, another Republican killed by the Free Staters in Dublin, abducted in the city centre, taken to the outskirts and taken to Killester, not far from where the other 3 Republicans were killed. That same month, September last year, I was at Glenmullen in Sligo to honour Sligo's Noble 6, the volunteers killed on the mountainside by Free State forces after they had surrendered. The centenary of the start of the prison executions, and the 3 lads in Ennis were 3 of the last of those prison executions. But those executions started in November 1922, and in Dublin we gathered to honour those volunteers in Glasnevin Cemetery and in vigils at Kilmainham Jail, where the first executions took place, and outside Mountjoy, where on the 8th of December 1922 Rory O'Connor, Liam Mellows, Joe McKelvey and Richard Barrett were executed most notoriously. We were in Castletown, County Wexford, at the graveside of Liam Mellows on a very moving and memorable day with a large crowd from all over Ireland. And we recall here the special connection of Liam Mellows with this county, because it was in the hills of East Clare that Mellows and his comrades were sheltered by the people after the Easter Rising, which Mellows had led in Galway. In March, I was in Kerry at Ballyseedy, where 8 prisoners were blown up by a Free State mine, as we honoured all the Kerry Republicans done to death by the Free State in that month of terror. And it was recognised, and it's important to say this, it was recognised there also that the deaths of Free State forces and of civilians in that war were tragedies of Kerry too, and that terrible deeds were done by both sides in the conflict. By the start of 1923, the Free State government had effectively won the war, but they continued relentlessly with their prison executions, and in the month of January alone they executed 34 Republicans in the prisons. Following the death of Liam Lynch on the 10th of April 1923, I should say, Frank Aiken took over as IRA Chief of Staff, and on the 25th of April he ordered a ceasefire which was to come into effect on the 30th of April, 100 years ago, tomorrow. By the time of the IRA ceasefire, the Free State had already executed 74 Republican prisoners in jails and barracks across the 26 counties. On the 11th of April, the second biggest single batch of executions in a single day took place in Tuam, County Galway, when 6 volunteers were executed. And of course, as I mentioned, many others had been killed in unofficial executions by roadsides and in fields all around the country. On the 21st of April, here in Ennis, a Free State patrol was fired on and a soldier, Private Stephen Canty, was killed. IRA volunteers Patrick Mahony and Jay O'Leary were arrested. The jury on Private Canty's inquest found that neither Patrick Mahony nor O'Leary could have fired the fatal shot. Nevertheless, both were tried by Free State court-martial and found guilty and sentenced to death. O'Leary's sentence was commuted to 10 years imprisonment, but Mahony's was confirmed. Patrick Mahony, aged 25, from here in Ennis, was executed in the jail, in the barracks, in Home Barracks, on the 26th of April, the day after Frank Aiken's announcement of the ceasefire. In his last letter on the eve of his execution, he wrote, "I am to die this morning. I am innocent of the death of the poor soldier. I am sorry for his fate, but I forgive my enemies, if I have any, from the depths of my heart. May God bless Ireland, and may her sons be united once more in love with one another." Volunteers Christopher Quinn and William O'Shaughnessy, both aged 18, both natives of this town, were also arrested for the killing of Private Canty, tried by court-martial and sentenced to death. And just to say what a court-martial is, because it was the same under the Free State as it was in 1916 under the British. It was essentially the army which Republicans had opposed, trying them in a pseudo-court, military officers with the power to sentence to death. Christopher Quinn and William O'Shaughnessy, they also protested their innocence of the death of Private Canty, but to no avail. And you've heard from Donna the quote from the letter to his father from Christopher Quinn, and I just repeat the one sentence which I think stands out. "You have a son you can be proud of, as I think I have done my part for the land I love." 2 days after the IRA ceasefire, these two men were taken out and executed by firing squad near this spot on the 2nd of May 1923. And so I find it fitting and moving to be with you here as we remember 3 of the last Republicans to die in that war, just as close to my own home 10 months ago I remembered one of the first. And it's important to say also that our commemorations are more than history lessons. They are acts of commitment to complete the work of these men and of the countless men and women over all the generations, right up to our own time, who worked and struggled and sacrificed so much for Irish freedom. Liam Mellows was right when he opposed the treaty and when he said that the Irish Republic was a living thing, an idea and an ideal that could not be crushed or extinguished. It was not crushed by firing squads, by prisons, by imperialist or neo-colonial armies, by the British government or the Free State government, by the execution policy of Cosgrave or of the De Valera. It has survived repression, censorship, internment without trial north and south, the H-blocks, Armagh, Portlaoise and English prisons, and the lies, misrepresentation and revisionism of its opponents. 100 years ago, the British Empire established a deeply conservative state in the 26 counties and a deeply sectarian state in the 6 counties. They thought they had buried the Republican ideal. They thought they had buried the Republic itself. But instead, they had planted seeds deeper in the soil and they sprouted and grew again. The Republican ideal, the goal of a united Ireland, a real republic of equals, is at the heart of everything we do today. The long, steady growth of Sinn Féin over the last 2 decades is the result of applying Irish republicanism to the politics of conflict resolution and applying Republican commitment to the maintenance of peace and to progress towards lasting peace with justice. For us, that progress means the reunification of Ireland and the implementation of the principles of the proclamation, with equal rights and equal opportunities, the ownership of Ireland for the people of Ireland, the provision of housing and healthcare and education and public services for all, a decent standard of living and quality of life. In case there is any doubt in advance of the English coronation next week, let it be made crystal clear that Sinn Féin does not and never will accept the claim of the English monarchy to sovereignty over any part of Ireland. The signalled attendance of First Minister Designate Michelle O'Neill at the event does not alter that fact. It emphasises her wish to be a First Minister for all, to show by a very difficult act for any Irish Republican that in the new United Ireland, people's beliefs will be respected and there will be a welcome place for those of the Unionist and British traditions. Liam Mellows paid tribute to all those Irish men and women in his day who are fighting for freedom. I quoted his words at the grave of Michael Neville in Lisdoonvarna last year, and I do so here again as we remember these volunteers and all their comrades. And what Mellows wrote applies to the 3 lads from Ennis who were executed 100 years ago, and indeed to countless others. And Mellows wrote, "You, my friend, talk of me," he wrote this in a letter to a friend in America. "You, my friend, talk of me as being the embodiment of Sinn Féin, but it may be surprising to you to know that there are men and women in Ireland today compared with whom I am as nothing. Many of them are poor, almost all are. Most of them are unheard of, and yet their work for Ireland deserves to be known. It will never be in our day anyway, in all probability, but it is to them the thanks of future generations of Irish people will be due. They gave their all in silence, seeking no reward and getting none." With these words of Liam Mellows, we remember and thank the 3 volunteers who died on this spot 100 years ago, and all those who died for Irish freedom. Gurmila ma, Gwiv, Accordia, agus an Phobal de Bú.